Today we're looking at a Nikkor H 300mm f4.5 great vintage lens. Join me. Hey, thanks for joining me. So I'm downtown today playing with a great old vintage lens. This is the Nikkor H 300mm f4.5. It's a Nikon F mount, and I use this on my Olympus micro four thirds cameras. So we're going to take a look at this. Before we do, if you would, please click on the like and subscribe buttons, and let's take a look at this thing. Okay, so the Nikkor H 300mm f4.5, its journey, you might say, began in actually 1964 with the Nikkor P 300mm f4.5, which was an earlier version. It only had, I say only, it had 5 elements in 5 groups, so there's 5 separate elements in it. And it was changed in 1969 to the Nikkor H, which has 6 elements in 5 groups. So there's 1 cemented pair, and and there's 5 groups of elements. Now this lens is a little bit older one. These were made even up through the AI era, so they had later coatings. Later ones would have probably better multi-coating. This one has actually 2 tripod sockets. I've got an Arca Swiss plate on one, and then there's another mounting plate here. So if you wanted to shoot verticals, assuming you're putting this on the tripod, you had to take it off the tripod and turn it 90 degrees and put it back on. Later ones actually had a ring that had a locking knob on it, and you could just rotate the lens. So if you find one of the later ones, obviously maybe better lens coating, better tripod mount system, so that'd be definitely worth having. This one is, like I say, it's an older one. It has a metal screw-on lens cap. These have a 72mm filter thread, so if you're going to put a filter on it, you need a pretty good sized filter. It has a built-in lens hood, which is nice. You don't have to go buy something extra. And so the lens hood is always there with it. Like I said, this is in Nikon F mount. This weighs about 39 ounces. So it's a pretty hefty lens. It's very solidly built. And aperture on this goes from f4.5 down to f22. Now I'm using this with an adapter to make it work on my Olympus cameras, and this adapter is one from Photoseed. You've probably seen these adapters on videos before. I've used these a lot. So that just mounts on the back of the lens, and then now this will mount on my Olympus micro four thirds camera. Today I'm going to be using an Olympus, my EM5 Mark II, which is my kind of go-to camera for this kind of stuff. I'm going to go out and take some pictures, and just to try to see what we can get image quality wise out of this lens. I've shot it before. I haven't really actually done any real serious testing of it. Not that what I'm doing today is necessarily that serious, but I just want to capture some images to try to demonstrate the quality of the lens. Now, one of the things that's really cool about using these old vintage lenses, the telephoto lenses, on your micro four thirds, is that, remember, the focal length of the lens compared to full frame is doubled. So this 300mm lens on your micro four thirds camera now has the image size of a 600mm lens. So you get that. But then the thing you also have to remember is that these lenses were designed for a slightly larger format, obviously 35mm full frame film. And with micro four thirds, you're only using the central part of that image. Now, if you've read many lens tests, one of the things you pick up on pretty quick is that lenses, pretty much all of them, perform better at the center than they do at the edges. So one of the advantages of using this on micro four thirds is that you're kind of throwing away the outside edges of the image. We're not using that. We're only using the best part of the image near the center. So when you use these lenses on micro four thirds, you get the benefit of that. As compared to, like, if you put this on a full frame camera, which you certainly can, however it performs at the edges, that's, what you're going to get. With micro four thirds, you're getting just the central part of that. So you get really the best of the lens when you're doing this. So this is, like I say, it's going to be equivalent to a 600mm lens on the Olympus. So we're going to take it out today. I'm going to shoot some pictures with it. I'm downtown here. Probably not a lot of wildlife down here, but there's some nice architecture and other things that we can shoot that we can use to demonstrate the image quality of this lens. So we're gonna get that set up on the camera and take it out and take some pictures, and then we'll come back and take a look at those. Okay, so I tried to find some subjects that had good texture, good detail, so you can see resolving power on the lens. Here I've zoomed in to 100% on the zoom and cropped it at that so you can see a bit more detail. Lens has pretty good sharpness. This is an old clock on the outside of the First National Center building downtown. And when we zoom in on it, the brass numbers, you can actually, if you look close, see the slots in the screws that hold those numbers on. The lens has pretty good resolving power. I think it does quite well in resolution. This is the federal courthouse building downtown. When we zoom in on it, you're actually going to be able to see some texture in the, in the construction or the surface of the building. You can see those lines on that column. It's got pretty good resolving power. Here's some artwork. I didn't zoom in on this one, but again, you can see it's got pretty decent resolution. The lens does pretty well. If it does anything, if it lacks anything, I'm going to say it could use some more contrast. This is a full sunlight piece of a tree branch or tree trunk. It's got good contrast. I think the color rendition on it's pretty good. These images have not been sharpened or modified in terms of saturation or anything like that. So I handheld a few pictures just to kind of see how the image stabilization on the Olympus EM5 Mark II would do. And hand holding an equivalent 600mm lens is just not going to be great. Here's a close-up of the light pole. When we zoom out, you can see it looks okay, but when you really zoom in, that's just hard to handhold. And those were at a distance. When I shot a picture close-up of my dog Riley, looks pretty nice and sharp, and I'm at almost minimum focusing distance on this lens. And when we zoom in on it, you can see there's good image detail. I'm sure if I'd done that on a tripod, it'd probably be a little bit sharper, but it doesn't do too bad if you're close up, but hand holding at a distance might be an issue. Now here's the other day I took some pictures of some birds in the backyard. It was kind of gray and rainy out, so the contrast is kind of low, but it resolves fairly well on those birds. Again, if I was shooting little birds, I'd want a little bit longer focal length, I think. But here's a blue jay that was on top of this little, it's actually an old igloo cooler that I set out on a table in front of my wife's office window so she could see the birds. But when we zoom in on it, you can see pretty good feather detail. It does a pretty good job of resolving that detail. I just wish the lens had a little bit more contrast. But, really, you can't complain for a lens of this age. It does a very decent job. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed some of those pictures. This lens, like I say, it's an old lens. This one was made probably in the early 70s, something like that. I'm not sure the exact date. And for a lens of that age, it performs quite well. I can't say that I have any problems with it. Now, is it going to work as well as, say, a modern Olympus? I think it's the 150-300 zoom. No, it's not. It does not have the benefit of many years of improvement in lens technology and coatings and design. It's an older lens, but it does reasonably well. Pretty inexpensive to buy, and and I think I've said this before in previous videos, sometimes it's a good idea to find a vintage lens like this and try out a focal length that you're thinking about investing more money in, so you can see, is that focal length going to work for me? So let's say I'm a bird photographer and I'm looking at maybe the 150-300, and so I try this lens out and I go, 300 not quite long enough for those little birds. Maybe I want to go ahead, and I think there's a lens that goes out to 400mm, so maybe I want to get the longer lens. So it gives you a chance to try something out before you maybe invest more money. I know that there are some digital photographers that are taking advantage of vintage lenses for that use, and some of them realize that, well, hey, this vintage lens is good enough for what I'm doing. I don't need to spend any more money. So if you were a serious, obviously wildlife or bird photographer, you're going to want a more modern lens. I think that goes without saying. But these vintage lenses are a lot of fun. These can be had very inexpensively, and they really they do a lot better than one might imagine. Anyway, I sure appreciate you joining me. I always appreciate it when you watch my videos. If you have any thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. And as always, thanks for watching.